Ancient Rome can be viewed three periods in Roman history, preceding the Republic and the Empire. While the sources focus primarily on the later eras, they provide specific details regarding the kingdom's founding, symbols of authority, and cultural origins. Mythology. The origins of Rome are tied to the legend of Romulus and Remus. The sources note that Roman culture acknowledged its violent beginning, specifically the tradition that Rome was founded in an act of fratricide, the killing of a brother. The downfall of the Roman kingdom and the subsequent birth of the Republic were marked by violence, conspiracy, and legend. Political conspiracy and violence. The sources explicitly state that the Republic was born in an act of political conspiracy occasioned by an act of rape, an event that Roman tradition accepted as part of its violent origins. The early kings were distinguished by the toga purpura, an all-purple toga, a symbol of status that was later adopted in modified forms by victorious generals and emperors, though the specific office of king remained abolished. Welcome. Today I bring you a look into life in Rome. We will travel back in time to see how the people of Rome lived, loved, worked, and the beliefs that helped to grow and thrive in a time of war, disease, and slavery to become a superpower and bring advancements in medicine, technology, and beginning to form the world, along with the people that we are today because of them and what they were, both the good and bad. We would not be who we are today when people speak of ancient Rome. It's the legions or the great heroes. But rarely do we ever hear about the actual people, men, women, and children that were the blood, the soul, the very heart beating and making sure the rest of the body is fed to turn into something greater than all those that came before. Hope you enjoy, like, and subscribe.
Finest clay from the river Tiber, lady. Strong enough for generations.
It is beautiful work. I will take this one.
The state controlled the grain supply to ensure social stability. In Rome, the Cria Annone provided free or subsidized grain to the poorest citizens to prevent starvation and riots. Public assistance. Early forms of public welfare were established by emperors like Titus and Trajan, allowing plebeians to ask administrators for help during difficult times. Entertainment. The state provided free entertainment, such as chariot races and gladiator games, to keep the Roman mob happy and distracted from their daily struggles. The baths, a shared ritual for all social classes, was visiting the public baths after work. This daily practice allowed citizens to wash, exercise, and socialize, serving as a great equalizer and a defining element of Roman identity. Water quality. Drinking water was often of dubious quality. To kill bacteria and improve the taste, Romans commonly mixed water with wine or vinegar. Sanitation. While the wealthy had running water and private facilities, the poor in tenement flats relied on public fountains and latrines. Waste, including broken dishes and food scraps, was dumped into cesspits beneath the latrines. Social services and welfare. To maintain control over the large and potentially rebellious working class, plebeians, the state developed early forms of social welfare known as bread and circuses. Daily life in ancient Rome presented a stark dichotomy between the wealthy and the poor, defined by distinct differences in housing, diet, labor, and social presentation, even though both groups shared certain cultural rituals. Housing and living conditions. The contrast in living environments was extreme. Wealthy Romans, patricians, and wealthy plebeians lived in spacious homes, often situated on the hills outside Rome to escape the city's noise and smell. These homes featured an atrium, an open central court, elaborate frescoes and gardens, peristyles, and were staffed by slaves who attended to domestic work. In comparison, the poor lived in squalid, crowded conditions. Many inhabited apartment compounds, flats, located above or behind shops. In the poorer tenements, entire families might share a single room made of wood, presenting a constant fire hazard. Unlike the wealthy, who might have running water or private facilities, the poor relied on public fountains for water and public latrines for sanitation. Because they could not afford oil for lamps, the poor generally went to bed as soon as it became dark. Diet and dining. While all Romans generally observed 3 meals a day, ientaculum, breakfast, prandium, lunch, and cena, dinner, the quality and quantity of food differed immensely. The diet of ancient Romans was defined by a sharp divide between the wealthy and the poor. Both groups shared a reliance on grains and certain condiments like fish sauce. The quality, variety, and quantity of food served as a major status symbol. Grains and bread. Grain was the most important element of the Roman diet for all classes, but its preparation varied. They consumed fine, white bread made from wheat, dark bread made from barley or wheat of lower quality. A very common meal for the lower classes and soldiers was a porridge made of spelt or barley called pulse. In the city of Rome, the state provided free or subsidized grain to the poor to maintain social stability. Breakfast, ientaculum. For many, this was a modest meal of bread served with salt, honey, or olive oil. Exotic meats versus legumes. The consumption of meat was a primary indicator of wealth. The elite enjoyed pork, poultry, and lamb, often roasted or stewed. Banquets, they served exotic meats including peacock, flamingo, and ostrich. A specific delicacy for the rich was the dormouse, a rodent raised and fattened in a special terracotta pot called a glorarium. Meat was expensive, so the poor relied on legumes, beans, lentils, and peas for protein. Cheese, made from cow, sheep, or goat milk, and eggs were versatile and accessible sources of protein for people at all levels of society. Condiments and flavors. Romans loved sauces and seasonings, particularly to mask the blandness of basic foods or to preserve them. Garum, this fermented fish sauce, was the most famous Roman condiment, used similarly to modern soy sauce. It was made by crushing and salting the intestines of fish like tuna and moray eels. While it was a staple for many, wealthy merchants could amass fortunes producing and selling high-quality wine. This was the beverage of choice for all classes, though it was almost always diluted with water. The wealthy drank high-quality wines from regions like Falernum, while the poor drank low-quality vintages. A drink made of vinegar and water, which was a staple for Roman soldiers and the lower classes. Often of dubious quality, water was frequently mixed with wine or vinegar to improve the taste and kill bacteria. Generally considered a drink for children or the sick, not healthy adults. Dining customs. The way food was eaten also signaled status. The wealthy reclined on couches during elaborate dinner parties, cena, while the common people ate their modest meals while seated.
Excellent meat, servant.
Thank you, honored sir.
Pass the wine.
Ave Imperor! Morituri te salutant!
Gladiator games were a defining form of institutionalized violence and entertainment in ancient Rome, serving as both a political tool and a cultural ritual. Bread and circuses. The state used gladiator games as a method of social control. To keep the populace and potentially rebellious Roman mob, the plebeians, manageable, emperors and officials provided bread and circuses, free food and entertainment. These spectacles, along with chariot races, were attended by the poor to relax and witness fights for life, fame, and fortune. For the wealthy, sponsoring these games was a way to display status and generosity. For instance, wealthy freedmen like C. Lucius Storax are recorded as having provided gladiatorial games to the public to cement their social standing. The gladiators, elite athletes. Despite their often servile status, gladiators were revered, much like modern elite athletes. Lifestyle. They lived and trained communally in gladiatorial barracks. Evidence from Pompeii suggests they received the best healthcare and the finest foods to maintain their physique for the arena. Equipment. Artifacts recovered from Pompeii include elaborate bronze helmets, spearheads, and shin guards, decorated with scenes of gods, warriors, and barbarians. The arena experienced the games took place in amphitheaters, such as the one in Pompeii, which could hold 20,000 spectators. The seating arrangements at these events strictly reinforced the social hierarchy. Augustus and later emperors regulated seating so that the imperial family, senators, equestrians, and citizens sat in specific rows, while the lowest classes were relegated to the standing room-only tiers at the very top. This violence was not hidden but celebrated. The arena was considered a token of Roman identity, and wealthy Romans often decorated their homes with mosaics and paintings depicting these grisly contests. Slavery in ancient Rome was an integral part of the social and economic fabric that bound both the enslaved and the enslaver in a complex, often violent relationship. Slavery in the Roman world was not based on race, but was a condition that could befall anyone. People became slaves through war, birth to enslaved mothers, or being sold. A father, paterfamilias, had the legal right to sell his children into slavery. Slaves were defined as chattel, absolute property akin to livestock. They had no power over their own bodies or lives. The experience of slavery varied depending on a slave's specific role and their master's temperament. Wealthy households were staffed by a hierarchy of slaves. These included major domos, atriensis, accountants, dispensator, nannies, nutrices, tutors, pedagogues, cooks, weavers, and personal attendants. Some served as status symbols, such as the boy commodities purchased for their beauty. While some domestic slaves in elite households might establish tightly knit families and even communities, others faced brutal conditions, working in agriculture, mines, and workshops. Some slaves were trained as gladiators. While they could achieve fame as elite athletes, they were slaves who fought for their lives to entertain the masses. Both male and female slaves were expected to be sexually obedient, and masters could use them to satisfy their own desires. Slaves could be whipped, branded, or executed for minor offenses or accidents. Fear of slave rebellions or violence against masters was also a constant undercurrent, leading to harsh laws and punishments. Unlike many other slave systems, Roman slavery allowed for manumission, the freeing of slaves. Freed slaves, liberti, became Roman citizens, though with some restrictions, and often maintained ties to their former masters. Some freedmen achieved significant wealth and status. Freed slave who became incredibly rich, see Lucius Storax, sponsored public games to display their new status. Remarkably, there was no abolitionist movement in ancient Rome. Even early Christians did not question the institution of slavery itself. It was viewed essential for the good life of the free citizen. Slaves generally wore simple tunics made of coarse, dark wool. Unlike citizens, they were not entitled to wear the toga, which was a mark of free citizenship. However, high-ranking slaves in wealthy households might be dressed more elegantly to reflect their master's status. For the regular people of Rome, plebeians, freedmen, and the poor, religion was less about theology and more about a practical, contractual relationship, quid pro quo, with the spiritual forces that governed their daily survival. While they observed state festivals, their most intense religious practice occurred within the home, centered on ensuring the protection and prosperity of the family unit. The contract and animism. For the common Roman, the world was filled with divine spirits, noumena, inhabiting everything from trees to doorways. Religious faith was viewed as a contract. If the household honored these spirits properly, the spirits would grant health and safety. If neglected, the family would suffer misfortune. Commoners prioritized these domestic spirits over great state gods like Jupiter, because domestic spirits affected daily life immediately, whereas state gods were concerned with the broader empire. Domestic deities and the Lararium. The center of religious life for regular people was the household shrine, Lararium, usually located in the atrium or kitchen. Here the family worshipped specific spirits, Lares. These were guardian spirits, often viewed as the spirits of deceased ancestors, who watched over the household and community. Penates. These were the spirits of the pantry and kitchen. They ensured the family had food to eat. Statuettes of the Penates were often placed on the table during meals. Genius. The divine spirit of manhood and the head of the household, paterfamilias, often symbolized by a snake. Vesta and Janus. Vesta was the goddess of the hearth, while Janus guarded the door. Janus had specific helper spirits for hinges, Cardea, and the threshold, Lamentinus. Daily rituals and practices. Religious practice was woven into the fabric of everyday life, rather than reserved for a Sabbath. Mealtime rituals. Before eating, families gave thanks to the Penates. A portion of the meal was set aside and burned in the hearth as an offering to the gods. Protection from evil. To protect children from malevolent forces, they were given a bulla, a pouch containing amulets, 8 or 9 days after birth. They wore this constantly until adulthood to ward off the evil eye and other dangers. Coming of age. When a boy became a man, around age 14, he underwent a religious ceremony where he removed his bulla and childhood toga, dedicating them to the household gods before putting on the toga virilis. The wealthy elite generally did not perform manual labor. Instead were centered on public service, maintaining social status, and managing their assets. The most distinguished careers were in government and the military. Men might serve as senators, curule magistrates, officials who managed public works and games, or generals. The wealthy owned large estates and businesses, but they rarely worked in the manid. The head of the household, pater familias, held absolute power but delegated actual management to high-ranking slaves or freedmen, such as the procurator or dispensator, accountant. Wealthy citizens, including rich freedmen, worked to maintain their status by sponsoring public benefits. For example, they might fund gladiatorial games or public monuments to gain political favor and popularity. The plebeians, the common people, worked constantly to support their families. They were the farmers, bakers, builders, and craftsmen. Pompey reveals a wide variety of specific careers. Many plebeians lived in apartments, flats, located directly above or behind their shops, blurring the line between home and work. A major industry was cloth production. This included spinners and weavers, as well as fullers, fullones, who were responsible for cleaning and processing cloth using chemicals like sulfur and human urine. Unlike wealthy children who were educated at home, children from poor families were expected to begin helping from the age of 8. Slavery in the workforce. A vast amount of work in Rome was performed by slaves, who were viewed as property. However, their roles were highly specialized, ranging from menial physical labor to skilled professional work. In wealthy households, slaves held complex jobs with titles and responsibilities. These included the atriensis, major domo/manager, nomenclator, announcer of guests, and actuarius, record keeper. Slaves often served as the household's doctors, midwives, teachers, pedagogues, and musicians. The wealthy required slaves for every aspect of personal grooming. This included hairdressers, ornitresses, barbers, masseurs, and bath attendants, specialized industries. The sources highlight specific booming industries in Pompeii that employed various classes. Pompeii was famous for garum, fermented fish sauce. Wealthy men like Asulus Umbricius Scaurus amassed fortunes producing it, but the actual labor of crushing fish intestines likely fell to slaves or low-wage workers. Money lending was a recognized profession. Based on the sources, prostitution and the sexual availability of individuals in Roman society were deeply entwined with the institution of slavery, social status, and public display. Brothels and visual culture evidence from Pompeii offers a direct glimpse into this aspect of daily life. The archaeological site features a brothel gallery, which contains imagery of nudity. While shocking to modern sensibilities, such imagery was an accepted part of ancient Roman culture, often associated with good luck and fertility. Clothing as a badge of shame, prostitutes were visually distinct from respectable women through a strict dress code. While a Roman matron was expected to wear a stola, common prostitutes, specifically streetwalkers, were compelled to wear a toga made of coarse wool. Symbolism. Since the toga was the national garment reserved for male citizens, a woman wearing one signified a loss of respectability and was a badge of shame. Adultery. There is evidence that women convicted of adultery were also forced to wear the prostitute's toga to announce their disgrace. Slavery and sexual exploitation. For the wealthy, sexual access was often a byproduct of slave ownership rather than a transaction in a public brothel. Slaves were viewed as commodities over whom masters held sexual sovereignty. The market. Slaves were explicitly purchased for sexual purposes. The poet Martial describes, quote, boy commodities being bought in the Sciepta and girl commodities in the Subura, a notorious district in Rome. Expectations. Slaves were expected to show unquestioning sexual obedience to their owners. Christian moralists like Salvian later criticized Roman slave owners for viewing female slaves as natural outlets for their sexual appetites and considering such adultery unexceptional. Power dynamics. While the relationship was inherently abusive, some sources suggest complex power dynamics. The philosopher Philo noted that maidservants might use their physical beauty to seduce their masters, and the poet Martial satirized a woman whose 7 children were fathered by 7 different household slaves. Based on the sources, health, medicine, and social services in ancient Rome were characterized by a mix of advanced surgical tools, religious superstition, and state-sponsored welfare designed to maintain public order. Medicine and healthcare medical practice combined practical techniques with superstition, particularly regarding childbirth and injury. Surgical tools, excavations at Pompeii have revealed sophisticated medical equipment. Artifacts include scalpels, tweezers, suction cups, and cases for medical kits. Small boxes with compartments were used to store medicines. Medical professionals. The wealthy often had specialized slaves who served as doctors and masseurs within the household. Midwives, obstetrices, were essential for delivering babies. They used olive oil for lubrication, warm water and sponges, and in difficult cases, tools with sharp hooks to extract the infant. Childbirth. This was extremely dangerous for both mother and child due to infection and complications. To ensure a safe delivery, women relied heavily on religious rites and folk remedies, such as drinking powdered sow's dung or inhaling fumes from hyena fat. Infant mortality. Death rates were high. Infants were not named until 8 or 9 days after birth, and there was no formal mourning period for babies younger than 1 year. Public health and hygiene. The baths, a shared ritual for all social classes, was visiting the public baths after work. This daily practice allowed citizens to wash, exercise, and socialize, serving as a great equalizer and a defining element of Roman identity. Festivals and the dead. Regular people participated heavily in festivals that bridged the domestic and public spheres. Parentalia and Feralia. These February festivals focused on honoring the friendly dead, parentes. Families visited graves to leave gifts and food, Lemuria. This festival was designed to exorcise angry or restless spirits, lemurs or poltergeists, who might haunt a home if not properly placated. Compitalia. This festival honored the lares of the crossroads/community. It was particularly significant for the lower classes and slaves who served as officials, magistri and ministry, for the cult, allowing them a rare opportunity for social standing and religious authority. Agricultural connections. Since many regular people were farmers or relied on local produce, agricultural gods were vital. In the fertile region of Pompeii, Bacchus, god of wine, was immensely popular, and his image was frequently painted in homes and vineyards to ensure a good harvest. Civic religion. For the urban poor, the mob, the state provided bread and circuses, free grain and entertainment. These spectacles, such as chariot races and gladiator games, served a quasi-religious and civic function, keeping the populace fed and distracted to prevent rioting. Attending the public baths was also a daily ritual, shared by all classes, reinforcing their shared identity as Romans.
To the great Saturnalia! Io Saturnalia!
Holidays in ancient Rome were a blend of state-sponsored religious observances, agricultural celebrations, and deeply personal domestic rituals. These events served to honor the gods, appease spirits, mark life transitions, and maintain social order through public entertainment. Honoring the dead and ancestors. A significant portion of the Roman calendar was dedicated to honoring the spirits of the dead, reflecting the belief that ancestors influenced daily life. Parentalia, February 13th-21. A 9-day festival honoring the family dead, parentes, and ancestors. It was a time for families to focus on their lineage and domestic rights. Feralia, February 21st. This marked the end of Parentalia. It was a day for visiting graves and leaving gifts and food. Charistia, February 22nd. Immediately following Feralia, this was a day for the living family. Relatives gathered to honor their living kin and settle any family feuds or disagreements. Lemuria, May 9th, 1113. Unlike the festivals for friendly ancestors, Lemuria was dedicated to appeasing or exorcising angry, restless spirits or poltergeists known as lemures. The poet Ovid described rituals performed during these days to prevent these spirits from haunting the home. Community and household festivals often bridged the gap between the private home and the public community, sometimes engaging the lower classes and slaves. Compitalia, December 22nd. This festival honored the Lares Compitales, the guardian spirits of the community crossroads. It was particularly important for slaves and freedmen to serve as officials, magistri and ministry, for the cult. In Pompeii, frescoes depict men wearing the toga praetexta participating in this ceremony, highlighting its social significance. Festival of Panes and Penates, October 14th. A public festival of communal thanksgiving was held annually to honor the spirits of the pantry and kitchen, who ensured the family had food. Vestalia, dedicated to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. During this festival, special cakes called molla salsa, made from spelt flour and salt, were offered to the goddess. Rites of Passage Liberalia, March 17th. This festival celebrated Liber, a god associated with Bacchus. It was the traditional day for Roman boys, around age 14 to 16, to undergo their coming-of-age ceremony. They would remove their childhood bulla, amulet, and bordered toga, toga praetexta, and don the plain white toga virilis, signifying their entry into manhood and citizenship.